The Musician's Map ebook is the new definitive guide on building success in music. Whether you're just starting out, or you're looking for gigs, or you're trying to make a career, the Musician's Map ebook is right for you. The Musician's Map ebook contains 20 years of music industry experience distilled into a 40,000-word guide to achieving your goals in music. Can't read? Get the Musician's Map audiobook. 4.5 hours of author Kane Power speaking directly into your own ears. That's right, even you can still benefit from the Musician's Map Guide to Building Success in Music. Head to musiciansmap.org/books right now to get your copy of the Musician's Map ebook or audiobook. Get it today and receive a special one-time only offer of a personal pat on the back from author and podcast personality Kane Power. The Musician's Map ebook and audiobook is also available at Amazon and Audible if you feel like supporting those giant websites as well. The Musician's Map ebook, your guide to building success in music. Proof of purchase required for pat on the back. To receive a pat on the back, you must travel to Raglan, New Zealand. Travel not included in purchase price. Welcome to the Musician's Map podcast. My guest this week is classical singer Sarah Court. Sarah holds a doctorate of musical arts and qualifications from 4 tertiary institutions, including the Prague Conservatory. She has performed with numerous choirs and orchestras, including the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra and the Australian National Opera Company. Sarah talks about how she became a classical singer, technique, coaching, and the struggles and expectations of life as a musician. We also discuss the relevance and future of classical music and defining artistic success.
Well, my name is Sarah, and I am a classical singer. That's probably the briefest and best description.
One of the first questions that pops into my head is it classical? Is it opera? Is opera under the umbrella of classical?
Yeah, this is what confuses a lot of people. So when I introduce myself to people, and if they're asking about what I do, sometimes I would prefer to say that I'm a classical singer, but that doesn't make a lot of sense to people. Most people, it would make more sense if I say opera singer, although the number of operas that I actually do compared to other gigs is reasonably small. So I sing mostly classical music, but in an actual staged operatic context, not even 50% of the time, actually. Okay.
And so, I mean, in my kind of layman's sort of understanding, an opera is more like a play,
or
performance.
Yeah.
And a classical performance is more a piece of work.
Yeah, there are a whole lot of genres and styles inside of classical singing. And if you're really, an A-list international performer, very often you would specialize in one of those. Maybe you'd mainly be an stage opera singer, or you might mainly be what they call oratorio. So you might mainly sing in oratorio, which is church music. So that's things people would be familiar with, like Hallelujah Chorus, right?
Yep.
So that's from a work called Messiah, and that work is by Handel, and it's performed by a choir and an orchestra. I love that. I'm like, choir, the invisible choir behind me.
Yeah, at all times.
The orchestra, which is in the semicircle like this, and soloists.
Yep.
So that's when I get called in to be one of the soloists, singing for, so it's normally the choir that hires you for that.
Sure, okay.
And that's oratorio. And there are a lot of pieces of music like that. It's just that most people know, they know Messiah. Sometimes they might know the Matthew Passion by Bach. Saint Matthew Passion. I could just call it Matt Pash and hope that everybody's familiar with all the abbreviations that we use. There are so many others, but very few of them are familiar to regular people on the street. They just, they know Messiah because of Hallelujah Chorus.
Yep.
Because another style, well, it's not another style, it's just another type of work that you would get as an opera singer is concert performance. So sometimes you'd be singing, it would still be with a choir and orchestra, but it might not be religious or from a church setting or something like Messiah. It might just be something like the Beethoven 9, which everybody knows because of the Ode to Joy. So they know that.
Yeah.
So that's a concert gig, and it's not staged opera and it's not oratorio. It's concert work, but it's still classical singing. So all of these things are classical singing.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, there's work with a pianist, which is, if I could get it, I would love to say that I'm an art song and leader specialist. It's what I did my doctorate in when I did my doctorate in voice. But you just can't be that anymore. There are 0.0 jobs.
Yeah.
And when you do concerts, you do them to about 6 people and a dog. So the dog is the most appreciative member of the audience. It's like, ah.
Range, eh?
Yeah, seriously. They love it. But very few people get to have that kind of gig anymore. There are a few of them around, and there are some real, out in the big wide world, especially Europe, where they still have lots of Western classical music.
Yeah.
There are some people who do that mainly for a job. But out here in New Zealand and Australia, even in the States, it's really... I remember being told by coaches sometimes, they say, "Oh, you're great. You're so great at this style." And some really high up people, one of the vocal coaches at Opera Australia was telling me years ago, "It's so wonderful that it's so rare to find someone who really understands this style. Such a shame there's no work in it." It's just like, I'm sorry, what? I'm really great, but there's no work.
Yeah. So why?
Yeah. So why do we do it anymore?
Well, okay. Well, that leads us to why? What made you start singing in this style? What drew you to this type of music?
It's interesting. I was thinking about style this morning because I was thinking about coming here and talking to you. And I often wonder if I might have done a different style if I had, been exposed to other kinds of music. And I was, when I was a little baby, my dad loved Elvis. He used to sing Elvis all the time. And, my parents had all sorts of music in the home. But when it came to learning music, either singing or learning an instrument, I don't know, it had never registered with me that you would be learning to do anything other than classical. So I was a really proficient kid violinist. I loved it. And I was really, really good at it. But it didn't register with me until I was an adult that you could play the violin as an Irish fiddle, or you could play the violin in jazz, or you could play all these other things with your violin. I had just always thought that, if you're learning the violin, you're learning to play Mozart and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, I would have loved other styles, and sometimes I think I've gone so far down the classical rabbit hole that it's quite hard for me to switch. But actually, my friends who are most successful and who have the most work, who actually pay their bills from singing, are people who are really versatile. They sing on cruise ships, they sing opera, they sing stage opera, they sing jazz, they sing everything. And they switch really easily, and they've always maintained that faculty in their voices.
Yeah.
So, I did a gig at the end of last year, which is on YouTube. It's like the one thing on YouTube because I get so stressed that nothing is ever good enough.
Yeah.
But it's on YouTube because it wasn't my idea about whether or not it went on YouTube.
Yeah.
And it was a street requiem written relatively recently, for choir and a small band or orchestra, ensemble anyway, and 2 soloists, and I was the mezzo soloist. But it called on me to sing in a whole lot of different styles, because each movement, or many of them, were based on different styles of music. So one was really, it was literally, the tune was taken from an Irish folk song, and another movement was really sort of inspired by African music. So kind of, I had to whip out a bit of Lion King in the middle of the Sorry.
You just said sorry to the interface.
I just said sorry to the sorry, interface. I didn't mean to do that to you. So that was quite tricky because I'm not often called to do that. And in fact, when they've performed that work in other cities, they've used separate singers.
Yeah.
But here in New Zealand, it's that kind of... It's a little bit the Kiwi way too, just everyone just muck in, do what you can. There are notes on a page, you're a singer, sing them. And it went really well. I'm lucky it went really well, even though I kind of bluffed my way through a bit of belt, which I'm not trained in. That's music theatre technique. But classical has always been I guess, really prevalent in my life. I grew up listening to a lot of classical music. Certainly I grew up singing and playing instruments with classical tunes. It's just, I don't know how you end up that way. I suppose also when you do classical music, if you do quite well with one piece, you'll get the next one and the next and the next and the next. And those pieces get progressively more difficult. So you make your technique better so that you can sing the next piece. I'm sure it's the same with classical instruments. You know, you get your next piano piece and you work really hard at your technique so that you can play that next piece. And then sometimes you'll look back and go, oh, wow, I've just spent the last 10 years singing all classical music because I was just going
from piece to
piece to the next. Yeah.
So, I mean, you've said that, you were surrounded by it. Do you think that was, obviously it was part of the main influence, the main reason why you got into it? Is it, what I'm wondering, is it, does it have to do with the training as well? Like being classically taught? And I guess if you're listening to classical music with classical singing and violin and things like that, then you seek out those instruments, and those, the teachers for that will be teaching you classically.
Yeah, I suppose so. When it comes to, I think I grew up in a time when a lot of people still had singing in school as very young people. These days, I think that's still true in the cities, perhaps, but I meet a lot of kids who don't do any singing at school at all, not in assembly, not anywhere, like at all. And so, but there are, and I'm going to give credit to, I must really acknowledge the work of the New Zealand Choral Federation, because they get kids involved in a lot of singing around the country. So there's something called the Big Sing, which is the competition among all the high schools and their choirs. Smaller children have it as well. And then they feed into things like the National Secondary Schools Choir and the National Youth Choir, which I was in as a younger person. Elderly now, so
Hardly.
Which then, of course, if you get into being really great and wonderful at your sight reading, which I'm absolutely not, you can carry on into something professional like Voices New Zealand, which is our premier chamber choir. My sight reading is just like muttering and swearing.
Really?
Oh, it's awful.
Okay.
I need a couple days
to
get really good. I can learn quickly. That's something I've learned really well. I can pick things up quickly, but reading on sight, I'm the worst. I'm so lazy. But anyway, I digress about my laziness. The point I was sort of getting onto is that when I came through school, primary school, high school, all of that stuff, there were a lot of choirs, and mostly those choirs were singing reasonably classical music.
Sure.
Sometimes they would sing like kind of folk songs or arranged Beatles songs or whatever.
Yep.
But certainly if you were quite a good little singer and you got into the best choir at school or something, they'd be singing classical music. These days, I know the choirs are a lot broader. So, they sing all sorts of other kinds of things. I remember at my high school, my choir sang Copacabana, and it was like the one kind of poppy number that we did, and it was all kind of jazzy, and we're like, whoa, Copacabana. And it was so funny. I think back on it, and there's all these kids so accustomed to singing posh classical music going, at the Copacabana, la 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 la. And it's the least jazzy poppity thing you can think of. So naff. But we didn't have that kind of this is that style, this is this style, it was just this is nice singing.
Yeah.
And this is nice singing, and you keep doing your nice singing in all of everything that you do. So often I think that's why, when you hear classical singers, like big deal classical singers trying another style, like they'll do a light music album or they'll do jazz songs or something, and it just, I think she knew she was taking the piss, if I'm allowed to say that. Sorry.
Yes, you are.
So
you can
rude.
say whatever you like.
But if you look up Kathy Berberian singing Beatles songs, and she does Ticket to Ride, and it's hilarious. But she knows, she's doing classical singing, and it's just about the funniest thing out. Because, of course, classical singers find it very hard to let go of the classical filling and stuff around us, and the production, the technique, and what nice singing is. And if you sing in another way, maybe that's not nice.
That's got me thinking, you're a career singer. Does that mean that you can sing in any style? Because the technique required for classical singing is got to be vastly different than it is for singing modern pop, for example, or for jazz.
Yeah. Ideally, yes. And I have friends for whom that is much more true than me, and I have a huge amount of admiration for them, and I wish I could be more like them. I can switch it off, which is basically what I do when I'm approaching a different style. So at the moment I'm learning drag queen opera, which is kind of the music. Cool. It's going to be amazing, actually, really amazing. In the Pride Festival in Auckland in a couple of weeks.
Awesome.
And a lot of the music in that is sort of cabaret style. So bringing like a full-on Italian romantic operatic voice to that isn't a good fit. But it is being put on by the opera company, and it is an opera. So you kind of find a happy medium, I guess. And when it comes to cabaret, it's a really interesting kind of crossover style. If you know any of the music of Kurt Weill or stuff like that, opera singers sing a lot of that stuff sometimes by toning down, say, the vibrato, turning on a bit more of what you would call twang, and it's a bit like, you know, the American accent and the English accent, and they used to have that transatlantic one of announcers in the 1940s or whatever. It's a bit like that, where you sort of go, oh, there's a middle ground here somewhere.
I understand. But you have, obviously, when you're trained in a particular style, especially as classical, you have a great deal of control over what your voice does, and you'd be very aware of how you control your voice. So I imagine that you would be able to sort of say, okay, turn off the vibrato now. Do. I mean, and even within classical music, if you're singing often very early music, you won't sing with a huge amount of vibrato. You'll use maybe quite a lot of straight tone, depending on what your conductor wants. But, so when I say early music, I mean music sort of from the Renaissance and maybe before that as well, if you're doing chant or anything like that. But I mean, I have a great deal of respect and admiration for people who are at the top of their game vocally in things like music theatre and jazz and all of that stuff, because I can't vocally do what they do. I can listen to them and I could try to emulate it, but I haven't spent those years honing that technique. Sure, yeah.
So I was listening to, one of these viral videos was going around of The Greatest Showman and the woman who sings the bearded lady. And there's that great story about how she just belted it out in the workshop where they were trying to get the production green-lit, and it was this very big emotional deal, and she was scared to come out from behind the stand, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, look it up. It's amazing. But it's interesting to watch her because she's a really solid sort of pop belt music theatre singer. And I could work at it, but I would have to go away to a coach and like retrain seriously to make that kind of sound. It's so what I can do is, like you say, I've got a certain amount of control over my instrument, and I can ask it to do certain things. But I would have a lot more limitations than someone who's really in that style. I
understand that. I think most people who have trained in a certain style will understand that as well.
Of course.
I mean, I've been playing hardcore punk and metal drums for most of my life. So if you ask me to play jazz, then yes, I can.
But it's like whiplash and your hands are bleeding.
Well, it's just, I started out when my wife asked me to play jazz for some of her stuff years ago, and we made an album and stuff. And it took me a couple of years to play quietly and actually understand dynamics.
Yeah.
And at this point, I'd been a drummer for a decade,
Wow.
And so it's a whole, as you say, it's a whole different thing. And if you, even if you asked me to play jazz today, I could sit down and probably get through something.
Yeah.
But if you got a jazz guy to play it, it would be jazz.
Yeah. Well, and world drumming, someone could hand you like a carved out wooden drum or an Irish drum or something, and you'd know basically what to do with it. But
kind of, but then
yeah. And then you see someone really go for it on that instrument and that style, and you realise.
Back to you. What did it take?
Yeah, more about me.
What sort of training? How long? What sort of lessons? What did it take to kind of become a professional?
Debt. It took debt. It still takes so much debt. I am in more debt than you can imagine. It's ridiculous. And occasionally I get really depressed about it, about the amount of debt that I'm in because of studying classical music.
Yeah. Student debt.
Yeah. Student debt and ongoing sort of costs, like adding up. Well, I try not to, but of course you do. Add up how much I spend on things like coaching and auditions and traveling to auditions. And it's just so much money.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of different arts disciplines are struggling with this at the moment, that they become more and more the preserve of really wealthy people, especially young people who've got maybe wealthy families that can support them and that can support them through doing free work. This is the perennial thing, which I'm sure a lot of your guests will talk about. Oh, do it for the exposure. Come and, and you just think, do you have any idea how much it costs me to have gotten this far or be a singer?
Yeah.
No. And actually people don't, they're not trying to offend you. They just literally don't know.
And they don't apply the same value to it as they do with other things.
No, because it's joyous and it's a hobby and it's something that you love and you're so lucky to, and we are lucky, but we pay not only in blood, sweat and tears while we're doing the training, but we pay a lot of money, especially if you get up to the higher levels. And of course, the higher you get, sometimes if you're good enough, you can apply for scholarships and things like that. But there are many of us who still need to train. You've got your A-listers who might have won a lot of big international competitions or been given a lot of scholarships to places and stuff. But you still need people who will sing all the small roles. You still need, if you're in an opera, a whole opera chorus of people who've got trained voices.
Yeah.
So they still all need to have paid their way through either lessons or a program of tuition at a uni or something like that, no less than your A-lister has had to, just that they didn't probably get all the winnings and the scholarships and stuff for lots of different reasons.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've drifted, but it's just so, that's kind of the story of a, not just a training singer's life, but a constant gigging singer's life.
Yeah.
That you are only as good as your last performance, and you had better be coaching up towards that performance, especially if it's not even if it's very high profile anymore. Everybody has a camera.
Yeah.
Everybody has a camera.
Yeah.
You'll be doing some tiny nothing performance for hardly any people in Ekatahuna, and you'll think nothing of it, and someone will film it.
Yeah.
And put it on social media or YouTube, and you'll just be like, oh, no.
Yeah. Had an off night. Oops.
Yeah. Didn't work hard enough for that one. Didn't coach heaps for that one, because, of course, we all work like crazy when we've got a big high-profile gig that's going to be in a big room or in the papers or something.
Yeah.
But everywhere you go now, there are cameras. And with a singer, I don't know, with a drummer, if you're like sitting there at a party and people are like, hey, drum something on the table. But we get asked to sing at parties a lot.
Of course, yeah.
Sing happy birthday for me, sing something. I mean, I've even been asked to sing at funerals, which is really difficult. I don't like to do it because I am usually bawling. Yeah. And singing and crying is not something that, they're not great bedfellows. But you can't even sort of do that without maybe being filmed.
Yeah.
And you really have to be careful about that, because you might think, oh, I'm just going to sing at my mate's farewell or at someone's birthday party. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And half the time you won't know it's happening, or you'll figure out that it happened later on, or you'll be, half cut and,
Yeah, just having a good time.
kicking your heels up with this terrible voice, and someone will have filmed it. And then the next person maybe who sees that is a conductor or an employer or, a choir director who was looking for soloists. And you're like, I'd had a few that night. Can you maybe look at something else? Here's something I prepared really carefully.
Yeah.
So you just can't curate yourself anymore. It's very, very difficult.
So you still do coaching?
Oh, God, all the time.
Really?
Yeah. If I can afford it. Most of the time I can't.
Yeah.
But
who coaches you?
Oh, brilliant people. Really, I'm very, very lucky. So I'm quite choosy about who I coach with these days, of course. But there are a few people here. Where do I go? Auckland, mostly. The last few coaching, really solid. I had a bit of money to spend on some professional development, and I flew to Melbourne and worked with a coach there who was amazing. He was fantastic. But I can't afford to do that very much.
Yeah.
And again, that comes down to like your progress in your career can often come down to how much money do you have to spend on that. I mean, that guy in Melbourne did amazing things with my voice. Sorry, getting very excited about this. But I can't, if I were less lazy, I could maintain that more carefully without him. But if I had a big pile of money or whatever, I could go to Melbourne a lot, or I could move to Melbourne and work with that guy.
Yeah.
And he would, continue his awesome work, and I'd have more of a chance of roles or, gigs, jobs. But who has the money for that?
Yeah.
I mean, you can give up your life and go and work in a cafe and hopefully get as many coachings as possible. But even that won't guarantee. You can be the greatest singer out, and the opportunities aren't always going to come your way. So it's quite a big risk.
Yeah. Is it something that's kind of more common with singers to receive coaching throughout their career? I kind of feel like other musicians reach a certain level and then kind of go, well, I need to practice and I need to rehearse, and maybe when I make something new, I need a producer to push me.
Yeah.
But I probably don't need to, have a coach. Whereas it seems like a lot of singers, even pro singers.
Oh yeah,
big
they
pop
do.
stars,
the A-listers do it. Pop stars, all of them.
coaches.
Yep. They all have coaches. Especially the higher and higher that you get, sometimes the more and more coaching that you will have, because more people are looking at you and more people are ready to go, oh, Adele.
Yeah.
What did you just do?
Yeah, what if she performed at the Grammys and messed up?
Yeah.
And it's because she didn't do coaching that week.
Well, and there's been quite a lot written about her voice and some of her vocal difficulties. So if you look online, like The Guardian, I think, had a really big article about that recently, but about singers in general with lots of struggling with these things throughout their careers.
Yeah.
And having to be like a recording. There's a really interesting book, whose name I can't remember. It's by Norman Lebrecht, I can remember that, but it's about the rise of recording, right from the very beginnings of the technology. And a lot of musicians, pianists and conductors and stuff, didn't mention singers so much. We always get forgotten. But they refused to work with it because it made people obsessive about being perfect.
Yeah.
When actually live music performance is not perfect.
Yeah.
It's flawed, and sometimes it's a bit faster and sometimes it's a bit slower, and you feel different on some days, especially singers who have, their instrument is a physical living being.
Yeah.
And so now that we're in this age, YouTubes and cameras and everything recorded everywhere, you can't be too good because you've got to be as good live as the recording you just put out.
Yeah.
So, and which is heavily edited and produced.
Yeah,
and where the pop singer's tuned.
Yeah.
Auto-tuned.
Yeah.
My God. I listened to a Pet Shop Boys thing on the radio recently. It was just on Radio New Zealand, and the singing was really out of tune because it was just like pre-auto-tune.
Yeah.
But actually you go, well, that's real.
I mean, do you
He's a
listen
bit
to
flat.
Sting and the Police?
Oh, really?
Half of their bass, half of their work, their bass guitar is out of tune, or the guitar kind of like the start of Roxanne. He comes in, he's out of tune.
Yeah.
It's really kind of famously, but it would never happen now.
No, and it's a real shame actually, because it means our ears get closed and closed and closed. Because we were talking about African styles and stuff. They have just that slightly different feel to their tuning and than a Western ear does. And so if we start to get really obsessed with things like auto-tune and the exact picture of exactly everything, when you do something slightly differently, or say you bend a note like a jazz singer does, how weird does that suddenly sound to modern ears that have only got the exact note every time? It's,
now we're going to get
yeah.
so far as where diminished chords sound wrong.
Yeah, what is that? Why haven't they tuned that?
Yeah. I feel like if any audience were to forgive that kind of thing, you know, it would be the classical audience.
Yeah, I hope so. Although they've become, since the days of early technologies, and, you know, I'm thinking of pianists like Horowitz and Toscanini. I mean, Toscanini's a conductor, sorry. But Horowitz was a pianist, but they're both of them quite vocal about not wanting to be recorded terribly much, if at all. And but now, of course, everybody from the 60s and 70s became pretty standard. Yeah. Even earlier a little bit. And we're accustomed to getting into the studio and having to produce an album and do all that stuff. You know, nowadays it's completely normal. So your classical audience has grown up with, I guess, even your older audience, which is often our demographic in classical music because they grew up with it more. They've grown up with recordings. Yeah. And so they've grown up with things that, even with primitive editing, have been edited and have had second, third and fourth takes and stuff like that. And we're not, in this country anyway, we're not really familiar with a lot of live concert going. Audiences are quite, like, a lot of people start wringing their hands about the death of classical music. I don't think it's dead. The audiences are small, but they're pretty dedicated. Yeah. And they do really support local artists especially, and when visiting big internationals come, they'll fill a house still. Yep. So that's all kind of positive, I guess. But yeah, you are singing and performing to audiences who are really accustomed to a produced sound. So you still have to be pretty careful. Yeah.
Is classical still relevant? Is the style still kind of current? Is there a future?
Well, I mean, there's a future, but we don't know what it is. Yeah. In terms of relevance, yes, always. Yep. Classical music is just completely relevant to the human condition. Yep. And when it comes to singing in classical styles, whether it's opera or anything else, oratorio, concert, art song, whether or not you can understand the language, even if it's in English, who understands opera singers singing in English? Nobody. Yeah. I mean, they can, you know, whatever. They can say that they do, but they don't. You know, it's all blah, blah, blah. It's just, yeah, we can enunciate that it's a weird sound and your ear isn't used to it anymore. Yeah. I don't expect audiences to understand. They're listening to a style of singing that they're not accustomed to, and probably old-fashioned words if it's a classical song. Yep. But you know, whether or not you understand what's going on text-wise or style-wise, it reaches something really elemental in human beings. And I think some contemporary music does that, but not all. And I think a lot of contemporary music these days is built towards sales and not necessarily really speaking to kind of a deeper level of humanity within a person. Yeah. And someone can love an opera and have no idea what that lady is singing about. They just know that it makes them want to cry, and it makes them, they can tell if it's happy or sad. You know, that's usually your starting point. But some stuff is just so moving, and you can't replace it with anything, with any other style. So there will always be that relevance to your human condition. Yeah. The future of it, though, will people still want to pay for that? Very few people do these days, compared to, say, wanting to pay for a pop album or something. Yeah. And will they want to pay to see it live when they could get a great master from, I don't know, the 1950s or something? Or I can't predict. I'm sure there will always be an audience, But where that audience is found or how you can serve them best, I have no idea. I'm pretty sure that already in this time, singers themselves, now I don't know about other instruments, but singers need to diversify.
Yeah.
So those friends of mine that I told you about who are really able to do everything, I think they are right on the money. Because if one, certainly in terms of just the very boring nuts and bolts of trying to pay your bills or whatever, if one income stream dries up, you can also try another and another and another. If you're just a classical singer now, you need another job. You just do.
I think I agree that it will persist though. I love what you said about how it's like almost elemental. Like it is.
Oh, it's in your blood. There's something in you that responds. And if I had a bigger brain, I would give you a really long discussion about medieval music and how they measured out these kind of the measurements between notes, like a fifth and an octave and stuff, and what that means to actually the human body and what it means from the Earth's relationship to the heavens. And
wow.
Yeah, like seriously,
Cool.
they had this whole cosmology around it. And I mean, it's early, and these are early ideas, but I think partly it's true. It's something in your blood that just responds to certain intervals and certain keys and certain melodies. Yeah.
Maybe it's I don't know, something's kind of sparking in my brain about the influx and the kind of saturation of the mainstream music market.
Yeah.
With, as you said, songs made to sell, short, sharp little ditties. That get people kind of singing along and dancing.
Yeah.
But there's rarely, that real connection that you find. And generally when people do find a real connection to something, it's probably on the fringes of pop or into lesser known genre where artists are actually creating something really meaningful.
Yeah, well, I often think of country music like that because I love country music. I absolutely love it. But if you look at like, I don't know, Garth Brooks or like really canned country made to sell to absolutely masses of people,
it's awful.
It's awful. But if you hear Gillian Welch, it's just like, wow. And that's like Appalachian mountain music. You know, it is. It's the fringe. And I find you're completely, I'm completely in agreement with you about the fringes of whatever genre you love are usually where you find really interesting people making really like soul connecting music. Because, I mean, they do want to sell records. Of course, everybody wants to make their living. But I don't know, something about it has less, maybe there are fewer cooks spoiling the broth at those edges. I don't know, fewer producers and executives and stuff like that. But I find that with a lot of pop and contemporary music that I enjoy listening to, that the first album will be something that I'll absolutely love of somebody because they've poured their heart and soul into it and spent years doing it. And then obviously they've become successful off of it. And some company has gone, right, more albums, come on, make them quick, make them, sell, make them jazzy. Oh, that one song off your first album was great. So could we have 20 like it on this next one? The artist that you loved in the beginning that was so passionate about their product and what they had to say and everything has now become part of a sausage factory that they have to produce.
Caricature of themselves.
Yeah. I mean, it's not always the case, but I often find that.
Not always. It's the old saying, I like your old stuff better than your new stuff. Yeah. Everyone gets it. So is there are young people creating classical music?
Yeah.
Are there is there a new generation coming through?
Absolutely. So what we rely on is new composers really writing new stuff. There are always young performers coming through and they all want to sing Puccini and Verdi and they all want to be, they want to be Pavarotti and Kirishikanawa and that's fine. Yeah. Those careers don't really exist anymore. If they ever did actually,
hey, maybe there's another wave.
Yeah, there's another wave. Anyway.
That was so convincing. Yeah.
But our new composers are working and they're busy and they're amazing. They write some really challenging music and some music that pushes all sorts of boundaries. A friend of mine went to a composition workshop, must have been a few years ago now, actually, and there was a work that had been written about, I'm trying to rack my brains, I think it was about the raids in the Uruwetas. I'm not really sure. I'd have to look it up. But anyway, the point is that a part of this contemporary classical work was people shouting, "Get out of the effing tent." And that's your classical music.
Yeah.
So often with contemporary music in the classical world, it can be really challenging. And there are a lot of vocal effects and new techniques and things that people want. And it's not always, or maybe even not often, calling on the bel canto technique, which is what most opera singers employ, classical singers employ. That technique, which is from Italy in the 1800s. So then we're called on to sing these very unusual pieces. Audiences can find them very confronting. They find it hard to support them. But then say 10 or 20 years down the track, it doesn't sound so confronting anymore. It's not so weird anymore.
Sure.
And some of the things that people were writing for us to sing in maybe the 70s and 60s now sound to us quite standard, and we're okay with that. Whereas at the time, it was this big uproar. I mean, you know about the Stravinsky Rite of Spring? It caused like a riot.
Really?
Yeah, in the theatre. And that was in I didn't do enough study as a university student. It was in the 1940s.
Yeah.
Like maybe the 20s.
Yeah.
So Stravinsky basically wrote this piece of music for a ballet, and it was so shocking to people that it was there was a huge riot. People were outraged, and the theatre went crazy. And
what a badass.
Yeah, exactly. What a badass. And now, of course, it's standard classical repertoire that all the orchestras play it and people dance to it, and it's and nobody gets up and storms out of the theatre anymore because they're so horrified. So so it's a good thing that our composers now are pushing those boundaries. The difficulty for them, of course, is a bit like a painter or something. It's hard for them to be understood in their own time. Yeah. So how do you pay your bills when you're writing really confronting music that has unusual sounds, and maybe you're just way ahead of the game? After you've died, people go, "Oh, he was really great at writing music."
But there's that how do you know you're ahead of the game?
Wow.
And how do you know that you're not just bad?
Yeah. How do you? It's very tricky. But, I mean, the same can be said of trying to be any kind of creative artist.
Yeah.
How do you know that you've got a talent that is worth pursuing? I mean, I'm... truth bomb, everybody. I'm 38. I just turned...
No.
Oh, sorry, I'll leave. And, I mean, I work at what I would probably call a mid-level range. I don't get the best gigs, and I don't do the lowest ones, and I don't have no gigs. I have pretty steady stream of mid-level gigs. How do I know that I should continue at all? That I'm not just pushing the proverbial uphill? And, when do you stop spending money on coaching and thinking that it's a waste?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're not an A-lister at something like my age and you've got that question in your mind, how long do I keep waiting tables and hoping that my break will come?
But
for every performing artist.
I know as well. I know that feeling. And I have that feeling.
Yeah.
But I don't think that you can. I think maybe you can quit pursuing it as your end goal.
Yeah.
But I don't think you could give it up. Could you give it up? Could you go, you know what?
I've tried. It makes me miserable.
I'll just stop singing now.
Yeah. I tell you what, I did for my sins and for another mountain of debt, an MBA quite a few years ago. So my partner had cancer, and we were looking down the barrel of maybe that income not being available to us, and a freelance singer supporting the family. Yay! Or just the two of us. And so I thought, well, I'd better retrain and get myself a serious job. Well, I had a breakdown that year. It was awful. It was so awful. And as soon I pushed myself through it and I completed the MBA, but as soon as I had finished, I went back to singing. I just needed to go back. And it is a compulsion. And actually these days, I would keep doing it as much as I can afford to, Maybe I can't afford that audition trip or maybe, whatever it is. And actually I had a young singer asking me for advice recently because I get really upset actually that in New Zealand anyway, maybe overseas as well, a lot of people who are quite high up in the industry tell young singers, and they were doing it when I was going through, you should quit. If there's anything else you can do at all in the world, you should quit because singing's impossible and you can never get a job, blah, 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 blah. And I said to this girl, you'll hear that a lot.
Yeah.
I said to her, you should not quit. Nobody should quit. Because we need singers at all levels. We need people to be singing in the choir of Messiah for me to get a job as the alto soloist. So, we need all kinds of singers in our communities. But you should, if you really want to be a singer, if you can be happy with being really poor, then you're fine. Because, hooray, you win lotto and you get the best jobs and you become Kirish Kanawa. Great.
Yep.
You're a trillionaire. Fine. But also if you're really prepared to just make do and hustle a little bit and get little jobs here and there and just live with less and not live in a massive mansion, live in a caravan that doesn't have a flushing toilet, if you can deal with that, be a singer. Why not? And then it doesn't matter if the big gigs come your way or don't.
Yeah.
Because you're okay with having less. You don't need all that material stuff.
I'd put that across to any musician, whether a singer or a drummer or a guitarist or
exactly. I agree. I think the difficulty and the kind of sadness for me comes through, and we sort of alluded to it earlier when you talk about those gigs where people are like, do it for the exposure. It comes through the fact that our communities don't value the creative people within them.
Yeah.
So, I know it's a fraught area and I'm not the best person to talk about it, but I really admire from the outside what's going on in France with the artist's wage that helps artists through those ups and downs of gigs, no gigs, which is the artist's life actually. And I think if we had more systems in place to help artists carry on, whatever their art, performers, writers, I don't know, whatever, then we might actually have much more thriving artistic communities at all levels, amateur levels, pro level, anything like that.
And that's beneficial to everybody.
Oh, so
everyone
great
who
for your
enjoys
community.
art, which is everyone, isn't it?
Well, whether or not they think they do.
Everyone likes a nice painting.
Well,
everyone likes a nice song.
Yeah, exactly. Or it's hard for people to quantify what things like music and art and writing add to their lives. But really, you can break down a lot of things in life that we wouldn't have without great artists and, filtering down into the theme of your favorite TV show or, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
But until the community really values artists a lot more, then it's always going to be an uphill slog. So maybe I think, it would be better if people just said to young artists, it's really, it's tricky and tough, but you don't need to drive a Mercedes to be happy. Your beat up little Honda will get you around and you'll be fine.
And you'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly. You will actually be fine and you will live your life.
It's about your personal definition of success, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it changes throughout your life as you change and as things happen.
Yeah.
But if you're defining success as driving a Mercedes and you want to be a musician, you're going to be in the top 0.01% of musicians.
I know.
Whereas the rest of us, we drive a banged up old Mazda.
Well,
and it's fine.
It's also the industry's responsibility, I think. Because that's sometimes depending on what industry you're in and what your industry is like, that can be your industry's idea of success too.
Yeah.
And that can be passed on through the ranks unless you earn X amount or unless you do this, you're not good enough.
There's a huge problem in hip hop and rap with that. And all these young guys, there's been a massive big thing about it. They're they have to put up this front. This, I have so much money, the cars, the women, the jewelry, the clothes.
Yeah.
I have so much.
Yeah.
And they have to put it up to fit into the genre.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
people will listen to them, and if they don't, then they're
Yeah.
in an entirely different genre.
Yeah, and it's so funny. I love that I'm about to draw a line between classical and hip hop. Yeah, but I mean, classical music is amazing. If you go to the galas and stuff like that, the audiences are dripping in diamonds and furs and tuxedos, and maybe you'll be on stage in this beautiful gown and you look amazing, and it's all about the external, and you're projecting this image of absolute perfection and height of society, the height of elite kind of hoity-toity posh society. And then of course you walk into your dressing room and you put on your warehouse jandals and you're like, and you don't dress up for a podcast because you're straight off the farm from feeding the pigs.
No one dresses up for the podcast. It's fine. I don't dress up for the podcast.
Oh, God.
Finally, where can people in New Zealand, and also because 2/3 or 3/4 of the audience is from overseas, what sort of ways can people get into classical music in a modern context, and where can they go?
So many ways. I struggle with it because I don't like to listen to it personally, but the whole opera sensation has brought a lot of people into full-on operatic music. So I have to admit that people like Andrea Bocelli and Sarah Brightman and Hayley Westenra, stuff like that, Charlotte Church when she was little, they have brought people through sometimes. Other times, of course, people listen to that and they think that's opera and then they shut the door and they don't go any further into really... There's some amazing music out there that nobody knows about. If you've been to the movies lately, chances are you've heard some amazing classical music, or if it's not actually classical, it's been played on classical instruments.
Yeah.
Sorry, I work part-time in a cinema, so I hear a lot of music over the credits. So at the end of the post, there's this beautiful string orchestra playing. It's not classical music, but those are strings. Those are classical strings. There's cellos and there are violins.
Real orchestra.
It's a real orchestra. And if you like that, maybe you'll look up some other orchestras playing other music and all of that sort of thing. I mean, same with singing. 3 Billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri opens with a beautiful classical singer singing The Last Rose of Summer.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely divine. It's really hard to say what the gateway drug would be for individual people, because different things will connect with different people. My absolute desert island composer is Bach. If I could take the works of only one composer with me away to a desert island or to prison or something, it's not long away, I tell you. It'll be debtor's prison, that one. It would be Bach.
Yeah.
It's soul food. I just cannot get enough. It's so, so beautiful. So anything by J.S. Bach, who I am completely crazy about, but that's my thing. Everybody will have a different thing.
Yeah, totally.
Sometimes I think there are equivalents across contemporary genres and classical ones that might make more sense to people. So like if you're into heavy duty, really hard out rock, try Wagner.
Yeah.
It's like,
absolutely.
Literally, what's that band? Metallica. And they did the thing with the symphony orchestra.
Yeah, the Philharmonic.
Yeah. And I think the conductor on that DVD is like, well, yeah, it's like Wagner. It's
Yeah, it is. That was my gateway.
Yeah. If you love singer-songwriters, go for like the French Impressionists like Debussy and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Or if you love hip hop or something with a beat, try Mozart, because that dude just goes digga 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 the whole time.
Yeah.
So there's, or if you're looking for something really soulful, Bach, without a doubt. And I think the most important thing really is just to have really open ears. I mean, I'm a classical musician and I love Gillian Welch and I love Jill Scott and I love all kinds of music. And some of it I don't really love, but I can appreciate it. And I'll listen to it and go, wow, whoever is doing that is really tearing it up.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we've just lost a bit of that. People talk about the bubble that you live in on the internet now. You just like your one thing and you get your news from the one place that you like and reinforce your own opinions. And I think musically we've come a bit like that as well. I just like this genre and I just like these artists and everything else is rubbish, and just listen a bit broader. I mean,
I'd agree. And I'd say, for anyone listening, Something that affected me in a massive way was actually going to see classical music performed live.
Yeah.
And it can be,
It's
you
pricey.
It can be pricey, or you might, if you're lucky and you live in Europe, you can go to a cathedral and see, performance for €10 or €15 or something.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's a public event, Christmas in the park, or maybe it's something else. But if you do get the chance, I definitely would recommend going.
See students. A lot of students are amazing.
Yeah.
Like really amazing.
Yeah.
Singers, I think, take a little more time to bake, but but they're great musicians, many of them, and you can see them for nothing a lot of the time, lunchtime concerts and stuff like that.
Yeah. Go there and absorb it. Close your eyes and just let it wash over you, and it's life-changing. Awesome. Yeah. Hey, thank you so much.
You're very welcome
for coming on today. Great to talk to you.
Thanks.
And that's all for this week. Thank you so much to my guest, Sarah Court. Check her out online at sarahcourtmezzo.co.nz and facebook.com/sarahcourtmezzo. And I'm saying mezzo in a weird way. I think that's how you say it. It's spelled MEZZO. And make sure to check the podcast description for a link to one of her live performances. Sarah's choice for Artist of the Week is Lorraine Hunt Lieberson. You can hear Lorraine by searching her name on YouTube or Spotify, or by clicking on the Spotify link in the podcast description. This podcast and the website musiciansmap.org is dedicated to sharing knowledge and advice about music and the music industry. It's all about community, honesty, and positive progress. The experiences, stories, and advice shared on the podcast are given freely with the hope that you can relate to them and benefit from them. If you've found this podcast enjoyable or useful, make sure to check out the Musician's Map ebook and audiobook about building success in music. You'll find it at musiciansmap.org/books, Amazon, and Audible. And buying a copy of the book directly contributes to the continuation of this podcast. There's also a free ebook, How to Get Your Music Heard. Go to musiciansmap.org/free-book to get your copy. If you have a suggestion for the podcast or for the YouTube channel, or you just want to get in touch and say hello, please do so via the Musicians Map Facebook group or by email at kane@musiciansmap.org. Thanks for listening and stay positive.